The great hall of the Galactic Concord had never been so quiet. Representatives from 17 different species sat in their designated seats, their various eyes fixed on the massive holographic display that floated in the center of the chamber. The image showed a star system being consumed, not conquered, not invaded, consumed. The swarm moved like a living shadow across the stars. It was not an army, it was not an empire, it was hunger given form. Billions upon billions of organisms linked together by a single hive mind, spreading from planet to planet, eating everything in their path. Metal, rock, water, life. Nothing was spared. Ambassador watched the display with compound eyes that had witnessed 3 centuries of galactic history. The tall diplomat had seen wars end and civilizations fall. He had watched empires crumble and new ones rise from the ashes, but he had never seen anything like the swarm. "The Third Fleet was destroyed 6 hours ago," announced the moderator, a crystalline being whose voice rang like bells. "All 4,000 vessels, no survivors." A wave of murmurs spread through the chamber. They were the greatest warriors in the known galaxy. Their ships were the most advanced, their tactics the most refined. If they could not stop the swarm, no one could. Admiral of the stood slowly. The reptilian warrior was covered in ceremonial scars, each one marking a victory in battle. Today, those scars meant nothing. "We threw everything we had at them," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Energy weapons, kinetic bombardments, antimatter warheads. The swarm absorbed it all. They fed on our attacks and grew stronger." The chamber fell silent again. On the holographic display, the swarm continued its advance. 3 more systems would fall within the week, dozens more within the month. The projections showed that within 2 years, the swarm would reach the core worlds of the conquered. Billions of lives would be lost. Entire species would be extinct. "There must be something we can do," said a delegate from the collective, a species of telepathic beings who rarely spoke aloud. The fact that they chose to use words now showed how desperate things had become. Rose from his seat, his wings folded behind him as he stepped forward, and the chamber's attention shifted to him. They were known for their wisdom and their patience. When he spoke, others listened. "There is one option we have not considered," said carefully. "One species we have not asked for help." The moderator's crystalline form flickered with curiosity. "All member species have been contacted. All have committed what forces they can spare." "Not all members," replied. "We have not contacted the humans." The reaction was immediate. Laughter came from some delegates, confusion from others. Admiral made a sound of disgust. "The humans," the Admiral said. "They have been spacefaring for less than a century. They are children playing with toys they barely understand. What could they possibly offer that we cannot?" Remained calm. He had expected this response. "I am not suggesting they can offer superior technology or greater numbers. I am suggesting they can offer something else, something we lack." "And what is that?" Paused, searching for the right words. In his 300 years, he had met many species. He had studied their cultures, their histories, their ways of thinking. And in all that time, he had never encountered a species quite like humanity. "They are not afraid to lose," he said finally. "Or rather, they are afraid, but they do not let that fear stop them. Every other species in this chamber, including my own, calculates the odds before acting. We weigh the risks against the rewards. We retreat when the chances of survival drop below acceptable levels. The humans do not think this way." Admiral crossed his arms. "That is not courage, that is stupidity." "Perhaps," admitted, "but we have tried courage. We have tried superior firepower and careful planning. We have tried everything logical and rational, and we have failed. Maybe it is time to try something stupid." The chamber erupted in argument. Some delegates called the idea ridiculous. Others pointed out that humanity's small fleet could not possibly make a difference. But a few, those who had dealt with humans directly, stayed quiet. They were remembering things, strange things. stories that did not make sense. The humans had once strapped themselves to explosive rockets just to escape their own planet's gravity. They had sent living beings into the void of space before they even knew if survival was possible. They had landed on their moon using computers less powerful than the simplest conquered child's toy. And they had done all of this not because they knew they would succeed, but because they wanted to try. After an hour of debate, the vote was called. It was close, closer than had expected. But in the end, the motion passed. A message would be sent to Earth's United Space Command, requesting immediate assistance in the fight against the swarm. The response came faster than anyone anticipated. The holographic display flickered, and suddenly a human face appeared. She was a woman with short dark hair and calm brown eyes. Behind her stood a bridge crew of other humans, all of them looking directly at the camera, with expressions the conquered delegates could not quite read. "This is Captain of the USS Resolute," the woman said. "We received your transmission. We understand the situation." Admiral leaned forward. "Then you understand that we are facing extinction. The swarm has destroyed every force sent against it. Our projections show complete galactic collapse within 2 years." Captain nodded. "We saw the data." "And you still wish to help? Your fleet is small. Your technology is primitive by our standards. The odds of success are essentially zero." The human captain smiled. It was not a nervous smile or a brave smile or even a confident smile. It was the smile of someone who had heard all of this before and simply did not care. "Yeah, we know," she said. "Relax, we've got this." The transmission ended. For a long moment, no one in the chamber spoke. The delegates looked at each other, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Ambassador felt his wings twitch with an emotion he had not experienced in decades. He was not sure if it was hope or fear. Perhaps when dealing with humans there was no difference. The human fleet arrived at Concord Station 3 days later, 12 ships in total. Compared to the massive dreadnoughts of or the elegant cruisers of they looked almost primitive. Their hulls were thick and heavy, built more like armored boxes than sleek vessels of war. They moved without grace, relying on brute thrust rather than elegant maneuvering. The alien observers watched them dock with a mixture of curiosity and disappointment. This was humanity's answer to the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. These clumsy metal boxes and their strange, soft-bodied crews. Captain was the first to step onto Concord Station. She was shorter than most of the aliens around her, but she walked with a confidence that made her seem larger. Behind her came her senior officers, each one carrying themselves with that same strange human energy. Commander Danny Vega walked at her right side. He was a quiet man with dark eyes that seemed to notice everything. Where burned with visible determination, Danny moved like still water. He studied the alien delegates the way a hunter studies terrain, taking note of every detail without ever appearing to look directly at anyone. Lieutenant Ben Harper came next, the weapons specialist. He was a tall man with an easy smile and a habit of tapping his fingers against his leg in constant rhythm. Even now, walking through the most important diplomatic station in the galaxy, he hummed softly to himself. A song from Earth, something old. Dr. Lisa Tran followed close behind, her eyes wide with fascination. She was the chief science officer, and for her this was a dream come true. Aliens, real aliens, 17 different species all in one place. She wanted to study all of them to understand their biology, their evolution, their place in the universe. But there was work to do first. Last came Chief Engineer, a broad man with thick arms and grease-stained hands. He looked at the elegant architecture of Concord Station and frowned. Too delicate, he thought. Too many curves and not enough substance. Give him honest metal and solid welds any day. The welcoming committee was led by Admiral, who made no effort to hide his skepticism. The reptilian warrior towered over the humans, his scales catching the light as he moved. "Captain," he said, his voice flat, Your ships are smaller than expected. Smiled, they get the job done. Do they? My people have lost 4 battle fleets to the swarm. 4 fleets of warships far more advanced than anything you possess. What makes you think your 12 vessels can succeed where thousands failed? We don't think, replied, we know. Admiral's eyes narrowed. That is either great confidence or great foolishness. Little of both, probably. The admiral turned and led them toward the command center. Ambassador fell into step beside, his long legs easily matching her shorter stride. You must forgive the admiral, said quietly. He has lost many friends to the swarm, many ships, many soldiers. His doubt comes from grief, not disrespect. Nodded, I understand. We've lost people too, that's why we're here. The command center was a massive circular room filled with holographic displays and monitoring stations crewed by dozens of different species. At the center was the main tactical display, showing the current position of the swarm. It had grown since last saw it. 3 more star systems had fallen. The swarm was getting faster. Danny Vega walked straight to the display and began studying it. His eyes moved across the data, taking in fleet positions, swarm density readings, energy signatures. After several minutes, he looked up. You've been fighting them wrong, he said. Admiral bristled. Excuse me. You've been treating this like a war, Danny continued, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. Deploying fleets, establishing battle lines, trying to overwhelm them with firepower. But this isn't a war. You're not fighting an enemy. You're fighting an organism. What difference does that make? All the difference, Danny pointed at the display. The swarm doesn't have generals or supply lines or strategic objectives. It doesn't care about territory or politics or victory. It just feeds. It's a living thing following its instincts. And you don't fight instinct with armies. You fight it with understanding. Dr. Lisa Tran stepped forward. I'd like to see all biological data you've collected on the swarm. Cellular samples, behavioral patterns, anything related to the hive mind. A delegate tilted its head. You wish to study them. Many have tried. The swarm does not leave samples. It consumes everything, including itself. Then we'll get our own samples, Lisa said simply. That night, the human officers gathered in a small room they had claimed as their own. Someone had found coffee somewhere on the station, and the smell of it filled the air. They sat around a makeshift table covered in data pads and scattered notes. Ben Harper was still humming, his fingers drumming against the table, was sketching designs on a pad, muttering about thrust ratios and armor plating. Lisa was deep in whatever biological data she had managed to gather, her brow furrowed in concentration. Looked at her team. These were the people she trusted with her life. These were the people who would help her save a galaxy that didn't believe they could do it. All right, she said, let's figure out how to kill this thing. Outside the room, an observer watched through a window. The humans were laughing now, arguing loudly, throwing ideas back and forth like children playing a game. They did not look like soldiers preparing for the most important battle in galactic history. They looked like they were having fun. The observer could not understand it. How could anyone face extinction with a smile? Perhaps, the observer thought, that was exactly why the humans had been asked to come. Perhaps that madness was their greatest weapon. The council chamber was packed when Captain stepped up to the central platform. Every seat was filled. Every display screen across 1,000 worlds was tuned to this moment. The fate of the galaxy would be decided in the next hour, and everyone wanted to watch. Looked out at the assembled delegates. She saw fear in their eyes. She saw exhaustion. She saw the look of people who had already given up hope and were simply waiting for the end. These were beings who had lived for centuries, who commanded fleets of thousands, who had technology that made human achievements look like cave paintings. And they were terrified. Good thought, fear keeps you honest. 3 days ago, we arrived at Concord Station, she began. Since then, my team has analyzed every piece of data you have on the swarm. We've studied its movement patterns, its feeding behavior, its growth rate, and we've found something interesting. She pressed a button, and the holographic display changed. Instead of showing the full swarm, it zoomed in to show a single massive form at the center of the organic mass. "This is the queen," said. "She's buried at the heart of the swarm, protected by billions of her offspring. Every organism in the swarm is connected to her through the hive mind. She controls them, coordinates them, tells them where to go and what to eat. Without her, the swarm is nothing but a collection of mindless creatures." Admiral rose from his seat. "We know about the Queen. 3 separate strike forces have attempted to reach her. All failed. The swarm is too dense, the defenses too strong. Even our most powerful weapons cannot penetrate to her position." "That's because you were using the wrong approach," replied. "You tried to blast your way through, but the swarm absorbs energy. The harder you hit it, the stronger it gets. So we're not going to hit it at all." The display changed again. This time it showed a molecular diagram, complex chains of proteins and chemicals arranged in precise patterns. Dr. Lisa Tran stepped forward. "We've identified a compound that acts as a neurotoxin to the swarm's hive mind. It disrupts the chemical signals that connect individual organisms to the queen. In simple terms, it's a poison specifically designed to kill this one creature." A murmur ran through the chamber. Poison. They had tried weapons capable of destroying planets, and this human scientist was proposing poison. "The problem," Lisa continued, "is delivery. The toxin needs to be injected directly into the queen's body to be effective. Surface contact won't work. Airborne dispersal won't work. Someone has to get close enough to physically deliver the payload." Admiral laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "Physically deliver it. You would need to fly a ship into the heart of the swarm through billions of hostile organisms without shields or weapons and somehow survive long enough to reach the queen. That's not a plan. That's suicide." "Maybe," said, "but we can do it." The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other, some calling the plan madness, others demanding more details. Admiral stormed toward the platform, his eyes blazing with anger. "This is what humanity offers. A suicide mission with no chance of success. We asked for help, not for more bodies to feed the swarm." Didn't flinch. "With respect, Admiral, your way isn't working. You've thrown fleet after fleet at this thing, and all you've done is make it stronger. Sometimes the answer isn't bigger guns or more ships. Sometimes the answer is 3 people in a shuttle with nothing but skill and determination." She gestured, and Chief Engineer stepped forward. The big man was holding a data pad, and he looked almost embarrassed to be speaking in front of so many important beings. "I've designed modifications for our shuttles," he said, his voice gruff. "Stripped out everything that isn't essential. No weapons, no shields, no unnecessary systems. Just engines, armor, and life support. They'll be small enough to weave through the swarm and fast enough to avoid the larger organisms. The pilots will be flying manually," Danny Vega added. "No computer assistance, no automated targeting, just human reflexes and human instincts. The swarm reacts to electronic signals, but it has trouble tracking organic movement patterns. We'll be invisible to it until we're already inside." Admiral shook his head. "You cannot seriously expect this to work. The precision required, the timing, the sheer luck needed to navigate through that much hostile territory. No organic being could survive such a journey." "Maybe no alien being," said quietly. "But we're not aliens, we're human." She stepped forward, and her voice carried through the silent chamber. "Let me tell you something about my species, Admiral. 200 years ago, we had never left our planet. We had never even left our atmosphere. But we wanted to reach the stars so badly that we built machines out of metal and fire and strapped ourselves to them. We knew they might explode. We knew we might die. We did it anyway." She pointed at the display showing the Queen. 50 years ago, we landed on our own moon using computers weaker than the devices your children play with. We navigated across empty space using math done by hand and courage done by heart. And we made it because we refused to believe it was impossible. Looked around the chamber, meeting eyes with every species represented. Fear is useful. It tells you when something is dangerous, but fear doesn't get to make decisions. We do. And we've decided that this galaxy is worth saving, even if it costs us our lives. The chamber was silent. Ambassador rose slowly from his seat. His compound eyes studied with an intensity that would have made most beings uncomfortable, but held his gaze. Captain said finally, "Your proposal is indeed madness, but perhaps madness is what is required." He turned to the assembly. "I move that we approve the human plan. Let them try. We have nothing left to lose." The vote was unanimous. As the chamber cleared, Admiral approached. His expression was still skeptical, but there was something else there now. Something that might have been respect. "I hope you know what you're doing, human." Smiled honestly. "We never do, that's kind of our thing." She walked out of the chamber to prepare her team. Tomorrow, they would fly into the heart of a nightmare. Tomorrow, they would face certain death with nothing but their skills and their stubborn human refusal to accept the impossible. Tomorrow, they would show the galaxy what humanity was made of. The USS Resolute dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and for a moment, no one on the bridge spoke. They had seen the images. They had studied the data, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality of what lay before them. The swarm filled the viewport like a living wall of darkness. It stretched across the entire star system, blocking out the light of the sun. Billions upon billions of organisms pulsed and writhed against each other, their bodies merging and separating in constant motion. The sight was wrong in a way that went beyond fear. It was life twisted into something monstrous. Captain stood at the center of her bridge, her hands clasped behind her back. She looked at the swarm the way a surgeon looks at a tumor, not with fear, but with focus. "All ships report in," she said. The human fleet acknowledged one by one, 12 vessels against a nightmare. The odds were laughable, smiled anyway. "Shuttle teams prepare for launch." In the hangar bay, 3 small shuttles sat waiting. They had been stripped down to almost nothing, just as had designed. Each one held a 2-person crew and a payload of toxin. That was all. Lieutenant Ben Harper climbed into the pilot seat of Shuttle Alpha. Beside him, Dr. Lisa Tran was running final checks on their toxin container. She looked nervous but determined. "You ever fly through an alien death swarm before?" Ben asked casually. "First time," Lisa admitted. "Same here, should be fun." He started humming again, that same old Earth song he always hummed. Lisa found herself oddly comforted by the sound. In Shuttle Beta, Ensign Chris was going through his pre-flight checklist. He was young, barely 24 years old, but his hands were steady. Specialist Amy sat beside him, her fingers dancing across the navigation console. "If we don't make it back," Chris said quietly, "I want you to tell my sister something." "Tell her yourself when we get back," Amy replied. Chris smiled. Yeah, you're right." Shuttle Gamma held Sergeant Nick Torres and Corporal Shaw. Nick was a veteran of a dozen combat missions, was an engineer who had volunteered for this assignment because she couldn't stand waiting on the ship. They made an odd pair, but they trusted each other completely. "All teams, this is the captain's voice came through the comm. "The galaxy is watching. 1,000 worlds are counting on you. No pressure." That got a laugh from everyone. "Launch when ready," said, "and remember, we've got this." The 3 shuttles launched from the Resolute and began their approach to the swarm. Behind them, the human fleet spread into formation, ready to provide what cover fire they could. It wouldn't be much. The closer they got, the worse it looked. The swarm wasn't just dense, It was alive in ways that description. Tentacles the size of buildings reached out randomly. Mouths opened and closed in the darkness, searching for anything to consume. The organisms moved without pattern, without logic, driven only by the endless hunger of the hive mind. Entering the outer layer, Ben announced, going to manual control. He took a deep breath, then plunged Shuttle Alpha into the nightmare. The galaxy watched. On Concord Station, Ambassador stood frozen before a display screen. On 100 warships, warriors stared in disbelief at what the humans were attempting. On countless worlds, billions of beings held their breath. Ben Harper flew like he was born for this moment. His hands moved with impossible precision, adjusting course a dozen times per second. The shuttle weaved between writhing masses of flesh, ducked under grasping tendrils, rolled through gaps that appeared and vanished in heartbeats. All the while, he kept humming. Dr. Lisa Tran watched the alien tissue pass inches from her window. It was horrifying. It was beautiful. It was the most amazing thing she had ever seen. "You know," she said, "from a biological standpoint, this is actually fascinating." "I'll take your word for it," Ben replied, yanking the shuttle into a sharp turn to avoid something with too many teeth. Behind them, Shuttle Beta and Shuttle Gamma followed. Chris flew with desperate intensity, his eyes locked on Shuttle Alpha's trail. Amy called out warnings and course corrections, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Hard left. There's a cluster forming on our right." Chris pulled left so fast the shuttle groaned in protest. They missed the cluster by meters. In Shuttle Gamma, Nick Torres was grinning like a madman. This was impossible. This was insane. He loved every second of it. "Tell me we're still on course." "On course," confirmed. "Core is dead ahead, 2 minutes to target." 2 minutes in this hell. 2 minutes of threading through a maze of living death. It felt like forever. Then Shuttle Beta took a hit. No one saw it coming. A tendril, thicker than the others, whipped out of the darkness and caught the shuttle's left engine. Alarms screamed. Systems failed. Chris fought the controls with everything he had. "We're hit," Amy shouted. "Left engine is gone, navigation is offline, I can't see anything." "I can still fly," Chris said through gritted teeth. "I can still fly." But he couldn't see where he was going. Without navigation, without sensors, he was blind in a storm of teeth and tentacles. Amy made a decision. She opened a channel to the other shuttles. "Alpha Gamma, continue to target. We'll catch up." "Negative," Ben's voice came back. "We don't leave people behind." "There's no time," Amy said. "The window is closing. You have to reach the Queen. We'll find another way." There was a long pause. Then's voice came through the comm, heavy with pain. "Beta, can you still deliver your payload?" Chris looked at his instruments. The shuttle was dying. They had minutes at best. But the toxin was still intact and they were close. So close. "We can reach the core," he said. "We just can't get out afterward." Silence. Everyone understood what that meant. "It's okay," Chris said quietly. "This is what we came for. This is what we do." "Chris," Amy whispered. "Hey," he looked at her and somehow, impossibly, he smiled. "Tell my sister I said hi." Shuttle Beta plunged deeper into the swarm. Its engines were failing, its hull was cracking, but Chris kept it flying through sheer willpower. He couldn't see where he was going, but Amy guided him with her voice, describing the darkness they passed through, telling him when to turn, when to dive, when to climb. They reached the core together. They delivered their payload together. The explosion was small, barely visible against the vastness of the swarm. But it didn't need to be visible. The toxin was already spreading, already working, already poisoning the heart of the beast. Shuttles Alpha and Gamma reached the Queen moments later. 2 more payloads delivered. 2 more perfect strikes against the monster that had terrorized the galaxy. And then they flew. Ben Harper flew Shuttle Alpha back through the dying swarm with the same impossible skill he had shown going in. Nick Torres flew Shuttle Gamma beside him, refusing to leave a wingman behind. The organisms around them were already losing coordination, already falling into chaos as the poison spread through the hive mind. They burst out of the swarm into open space, battered and broken but alive. Behind them, the swarm began to die. And across the galaxy, everyone who had been watching understood that they had just witnessed something impossible. Something human. The death of the Swarm Queen took 3 days. It began with tremors in the hive mind, small disruptions that spread outward like ripples in water. Individual organisms stopped responding to commands. Groups began to scatter in random directions. The great unified mass that had threatened to consume the galaxy fractured into billions of confused, mindless creatures. The Galactic Conquered watched in disbelief as the greatest threat they had ever faced fell apart before their eyes. The warships, which had been preparing for a final desperate stand, found themselves with nothing to fight. The swarm was simply stopping. By the end of the first day, the Queen was dead. The toxin had done its work, destroying the neural center that connected every organism in the swarm. Without her guidance, the individual creatures had no purpose, no direction. They drifted aimlessly through space, feeding on nothing, going nowhere. By the end of the third day, cleanup operations had begun. The mindless organisms were easily destroyed now, targeted one by conquered vessels. What had been an extinction-level threat became a simple extermination operation. And through it all, the galaxy kept asking the same question: how? How had 12 human ships accomplished what thousands of alien vessels could not? How had 3 tiny shuttles succeeded where entire fleets had failed? How had a species that had been spacefaring for less than a century done the impossible? Captain was summoned to Concord Station to explain. She arrived aboard the battered USS Resolute, her crew exhausted but proud. They had lost friends out there in the swarm. Chris and Amy would never come home, but their sacrifice had saved billions of lives. The ceremony was unlike anything the Conquered had ever held. Representatives from all 17 species packed the Great Hall, but this time there was no fear in their eyes. There was wonder. There was gratitude. And for many, there was confusion. Admiral was the first to speak. The reptilian warrior approached and performed a gesture she didn't recognize, some kind of salute or bow that bent his scales in patterns she had never seen. "Captain," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I owe you an apology. I doubted you. I called your plan madness. I believed your species was too young, too reckless, too foolish to contribute anything of value to this fight." Nodded but said nothing. "I was wrong," continued. "What your people did, what Ensign and Specialist did, that was not foolishness. That was something I do not have a word for in my language. We watched your pilots fly into certain death with smiles on their faces. We watched your scientists study the very creature that was trying to kill them. We watched your engineers build impossible machines with their bare hands." He paused, searching for the right words. "I have fought in 100 battles. I have led warriors against impossible odds, but I have never seen anything like what your people did inside that swarm. You were afraid. I could see it. Every alien in this chamber could see it, but you went anyway." Finally spoke. "That's all we know how to do, Admiral. We're not braver than you. We're not smarter or stronger. We're just really bad at giving up." That got a laugh from the assembled delegates, a strange sound in a chamber that had known only fear and desperation for so long. Ambassador stepped forward. The Tall had requested a private audience with after the ceremony, but he had one question that could not wait. "Captain," he said, his compound eyes studying her with ancient intensity, "in my 3 centuries of life, I have seen empires rise and fall. I have witnessed wars that lasted generations. I have studied dozens of species and their endless variations of courage and wisdom and strength. but I have never encountered a species like yours." He leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "How do you do it? How do you face death with such peace?" Your ensign, in his final moments, asked someone to say hello to his sister. Hello, as if he was simply going away for a while, as if death was nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. Was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Chris, about the smile on his face as he plunged his dying shuttle into the heart of the swarm. She thought about Amy, guiding him through the darkness with nothing but her voice. She thought about everyone she had ever lost and everyone she had ever saved. "We're afraid," she said finally. "All the time. Every single one of us. We're afraid of dying, afraid of losing the people we love, afraid of the dark and the cold and the empty spaces between stars. But somewhere along the way, we learned something important." "What did you learn?" Looked out the viewport at the stars. The same stars her ancestors had watched from Earth, dreaming of reaching them. The same stars that Chris had flown through on his final journey. "We learned that being afraid isn't a good enough reason to stop," she said. "We've got short lives, Ambassador, shorter than most species in this room. We don't have time to wait until we're not scared anymore, so we just go anyway." Was silent. In his compound eyes, saw something she hadn't expected to see. Hoping. The ceremony concluded with an announcement that had never been made in the history of the Galactic Concord. Humanity was elevated from provisional member to full member status. Their 12 ships and handful of officers had earned them a permanent seat at the table of galactic civilization. But that wasn't what the galaxy would remember. What they would remember was the memorial. It was built not on Earth, not on a human colony, but on Concord Station itself, at the very heart of galactic civilization. A simple stone marker surrounded by crystal flowers from a dozen different worlds. On the marker were 2 names and a simple inscription, translated into 300 languages so that every species could understand. Chris, Amy, they were afraid. They went anyway. Beings from across the galaxy came to see it. Warriors and scientists, diplomats and children. They stood before the marker and tried to understand what it meant. Some of them succeeded, some of them didn't, but all of them felt something change inside them. They began training programs based on human psychology, trying to teach their warriors how to function through fear rather than eliminate it. The commissioned studies on human history, searching for the origin of this impossible spirit. The collective, who could read minds, began requesting permission to study human thoughts during crisis situations. And slowly, quietly, the galaxy began to change. It would take generations for the full effect to be felt, but the seeds were planted there at that memorial with those 2 names carved into stone. Visited the memorial one last time before leaving Concord Station. She stood alone in the quiet space, looking at the names of 2 people who had given everything so that others could live. "We did it, you two," she whispered. "We got this." Then she turned and walked back to her ship, ready to take her crew home. There would be other battles, other impossible situations, other moments when the galaxy needed someone stupid enough to try. And when those moments came, the humans would be there. Because that was what they did. That was what they had always done. And as the USS Resolute jumped to hyperspace, carrying its crew back to Earth, the galaxy settled into an uneasy peace. The swarm was gone. The threat was over, but nothing would ever be quite the same. Because now they knew. Now they understood. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, there was a species that looked at impossible odds and said, "Relax, we've got this." And somehow, impossibly, they always did.